This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 507, entitled Femimafia Blocking of Masculist Penetration of the Mainstream Media. Description. Feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for nearly 6 decades, so have been powerfully brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street. So when masculists try to penetrate the mainstream media, the Femimafia, that is the feminist mafia, blocks them, seeing masculist criticism of women as just more male misogyny, but is seen as sexist hypocrisy and hence hated by the masculists. So how to overcome the Femimafia when most journalists are now women and monoconscious feminists? ? This flyer suggests other ways for masculists to change society by word of mouth in public university talks, or by applying local pressure on young fluffies in high schools and colleges, until so many millions of young women are dumped as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, that they scream so much in collective pain by not getting babies that the Femimafia is forced to take up masculist issues, describing to women why masculists, reject fluffies and spit in their faces, forcing women to fib up or rot on the shelf. The flyer itself. Femimafia, so Femimafia blocking of masculist penetration of the mainstream media, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. For those of you who are not familiar with the term Femimafia, it's a portmanteau word, in brackets, that is a shortening of 2 concatenated words. For example, my term artillect, which comes from artificial intellect, close brackets, of the 2 words feminist mafia. That is a mafia-like organisation of feminists who extort and make the lives of men a misery, especially in the media, which women now largely control. The feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for nearly 6 decades. So most women today have been powerfully brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street, that it is men who are the oppressors and women who are the oppressed. So millions of feminists have been taught by feminism to be misandrists who are out to get back at men, now that women have a lot more political and organisational power than in earlier decades, so are motivated to use that power and to punish men for the many ways they believe that men oppress women. This monoconscious belief, in brackets, that is their feminist belief, that gender oppression is a one-way street, is deeply ingrained in them, rather like a religion. So when they do finally hear some masculists tell them that in fact women oppress men far worse, these monoconscious feminists consider such an opinion to be ludicrous and heretical, to be ridiculed and suppressed. So, for example, when masculist professors like myself, who are capable of stringing a few phrases together, write masculist essays for the mainstream media, these essays are universally and systematically rejected. That is, the feminist mafia, the Femimafia, block publication of these masculist pieces because they are heresy to feminist beliefs. Thus the Femimafia acts as a feminist thought police, thus blocking expression of male gender politics, thus blocking gender political expression of half of the world's population, a mere 4 billion people. Not surprisingly, the masculists have a hatred of this kind of thing, which in time will become a war issue. Masculist leaders and theorists are very aware that if the Femimafia is not overcome, then masculism is not going to go mainstream anytime soon. It will not be able to influence the minds of the masses of men who are usually influenced by the opinions they see in the mass media, which is precisely what the Femimafia want. The last thing they want is to have their feminist gender political monopoly that they have had for the past 6 decades diluted by the presence of a whole new gender political focus that is not on women, but rather on men. The rise of masculist consciousness amongst millions of men is seen by monoconscious feminists to be profoundly threatening to them, so they are profoundly motivated to suppress it. I know from first-hand experience how threatening the very concept, even the very word, masculist, is to the average feminist. Several times when I mention to a woman that I'm a masculist, her first instinctive, unconscious reaction in a tenth of a second is one of fear, surging up from her unconscious that flashes across her face. I speculate that that reaction results from the following unconscious reasoning that goes on somewhat as follows. Masculism is the obvious male equivalent word of feminism. Feminists are often anti-men, hostile to men. So masculism is probably hostile to women. But men are much stronger than women and a lot more testosterone-driven, violent than women, who can seriously hurt or even kill women. Hence the instantaneous fear reaction of women when they first hear the word masculism. It goes much deeper than that. I know, again, from my own experience, how my now ex-girlfriend could never accept my masculism, which seriously pissed me off, since I saw her as a sexist hypocrite who accepted the right of women, of feminists, to lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc. But it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for the ways that women oppress men. For example, decades-lasting man-slaving parasitism, paternity fraud, pill lying, hypocritical opposition to the legislation of the para, that's paternity rejection right, given that women have the mara, etc. This sexist hypocrisy on her part was the root cause of our breakup, even though the sex was good and the companionship was also good. But she just could not bend her mind around the main ideas of masculism, which makes me suspect, very probably over the next decade, that millions of women are going to lose their masculist boyfriends, as their boyfriends increasingly see their monoconscious girlfriends/wives/partners as MFBs, that's monoconscious, feminazi bigots, who remain dogmatically closed-minded about the idea of women's oppression of men. That is, in fact, worse than men's oppression of women, since so many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, making them hugely more significant gender crimes than the relatively minor complaints that the feminists have about men. To masculists, to bi-conscious masculists, even rape, which is one of the worst ways that men oppress women, is small beer in comparison to women's decades-lasting man-slavery of men, having him work for her for no pay for decades of his life, which is the very definition of slavery. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against working for women, against being man-slaves to women for decades of their lives. Masculism is men's lib, that is liberation from decades-lasting man-slavery by women. Masculists tell women that women have, thanks to men's invention of science-based medicine, a life expectancy of 85 years, and hence a career window of half a century. So the masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat, parasitic asses and fib up, that is, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, by bothering to get career-competent educations so that they can be real FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style to be able to parasite and manslave a man for decades of his life, which is a major gender crime as seen by the masculists. Masculists are abolitionists. To have your masculist consciousness raised means essentially to see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. Fluffies are vermin to masculists, whom we aim to wipe out by punishing them severely, by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that they are forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless. And as masculist ideas spread across the planet, fluffies will not only be spat at, but will be rejected socially and sexually by men, causing such fluffies to lead miserable lives, excluded from society. Now place yourself as males, as masculists, in the shoes of monoconscious feminists who know nothing about masculist ideas, and ask yourselves, how would you react when hearing of masculist ideas for the first time? You would probably be very fearful hearing that masculists see fluffies as vermin to be wiped out. Women evolved to be highly dependent on men. Women could not hunt, could not fight, not plough, so evolved to be prostitutes to men, bribing men with sex in exchange for male hunted meat and protection from other men, especially male warriors of enemy tribes who killed women. Very probably, at a deep psychological level, a woman who cannot attract a man feels very vulnerable, since in the distant past such a woman was more likely to starve because she had no male meat provider, nor male protection from other males. So, I was not very surprised that I obtained zero reaction from my submission of my masculist op-ed to a dozen outlets of the mainstream media. I don't think it was badly written, although you can judge for yourselves by looking at flyer number 505. You would expect someone with a Prof. Doctor in front of their name to be able to write fairly well. So why did none of the media outlets I sent this masculist op-ed to take any interest in masculist ideas that affect the daily lives of half of the world's population? ? I think because of the presence of the Femimafia. When one looks at the editors-in-chief of the major newspapers and magazines, for example, in the large majority of cases, they are women, typically with master's degrees, so they are not stupid, and they have been raised all their lives in feminist ideas. So when some masculist, like myself, tries to get masculist ideas into print and the visual media, these monoconscious feminists balk. End of part 1.